Chapter 13, The Impending Crisis. Looking westward, John L. O'Sullivan created the movement of Manifest Destiny, which basically says that America is destined to expand their boundaries and spread American liberty. It had a racial justification. The non-whites, such as Indians, could not be in their republican system. They had to spread that liberty. It was a movement to spread their political system and their racially defined society. However, the opponents of the movement thought it would reopen the controversy over slavery and threaten the Union's stability, which was true. However, people were excited about expansion into Texas and Oregon. In Texas, Mexico had control of Texas at the time, so Mexico allowed American immigration. American intermediaries helped bring settlers to the region, such as Stephen Austin. They created centers of power competing with the Mexican government, which the Mexican government tried to stop immigration, but it didn't work. Americans just kept on coming. The Americans were unhappy with Mexican rule. However, they were divided over what to do. Should they be a peaceful settlement, or should there be a fight for independence? Antonio Lopez seizes power. He increases the national government's power. The Americans declare independence. However, there's divided factions. They suffer a very bad defeat at the Alamo. That's why we say, remember the Alamo. Sam Houston defeats Mexicans in the Battle of San Jacinto, where Santa Anna, the dictator, gives Texas independence, and Sam Houston becomes the president of Texas. Then Texas appeals for annexation to the U.S. However, there's division over slavery, and the opponents included the president, so he was like, no. Then there were disputed claims, British and American, over Oregon territory. They were having joint occupation. American interest in the territory increases. They have missionary activity, and that outnumber British and also devastate the Indian population. Westward migration into areas of mining / lumber, as well as farming regions. For mining and lumber, it's mostly men, while for farming, it's mostly families. Some trails westward, the major one is the Oregon Trail. It takes 5 or 6 months with many hardships. The Indians were generally more helpful than not on the Oregon Trail. And the families on the Oregon Trail, they divide their tasks by gender. Sometimes the women have it even harder because they have to keep working when the train stops. When the wagon train stops. There is a communal character of the caravans. It's a disaster when there's internal conflict. Expansion and war. In the election of 1844, there was the issue of Texas's annexation. It was Henry Clay versus James Polk. James Polk supported annexation of Oregon and Texas, and so he won the electoral vote, 170 to 105. He annexes Texas and divides Oregon at the 49th parallel. However, Mexico is mad when Texas becomes the state. So, Polk sends troops, and there's a dispute over the boundary and New Mexico, and the state becomes increasingly Americanized. The American interest then increases in California, which is held by the Mexicans. Polk attempts diplomacy, but then he sends troops to fight under Zachary Taylor. America comes to control the territories that it had gone to war for but Mexico refused to concede. Eventually, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, Mexico cedes California and New Mexico to the United States. So now the boundary of Texas is the Rio Grande River, and in the Tryst Treaty, America pays Mexico for the war expenses. However, there's a debate between the expansionists who want all of Mexico and anti-slavery leaders. The sectional debate. So the Wilmot Proviso is proposed to prohibit slavery in the new territory. However, it is not passed in the Senate, and the South is against it. They have different ideas to solve the issues, and there's a line between the North and the South. Should there be a line between the North and the South, or should each territory decide? And so then there's the election of 1848 between the Democrat Lewis Cass and the Whig Zachary Taylor. The opponents of slavery form the Free Soil Party, and they nominate Martin Van Buren. However, there was an inability of existing parties to contain their political issues of slavery. Then all of a sudden at Sutter's Mill, there was this discovery of gold, and so this leads to the California Gold Rush. The people who rushed there are called the 49ers. California migrants who didn't really prepare for the trip. They thought they were going to get rich quick. There were also immigrants from China seeking opportunities with mining and such. There was a labor shortage, so we exploited the Indians into a kind of slavery. The population of California swelled and became more diverse than it ever had been. Zachary Taylor says territories could become states and decide whether or not to have slavery. However, the South is angered because the new states would upset the balance in Congress. Henry Clay proposes a compromise, concessions to North and South. The debate between slavery and the territories. The first phase is between old men who argued for or against on basis of broad ideals, such as Calhoun, Daniel Webster, and Henry Clay. Congress defeats the Clay proposal, and they move into the second phase. William Seward wanted to eliminate slavery, and Jefferson Davis was economic self-interest toward the South. And Stephen Douglas was an Illinois spokesman. He was devoted to sectional gain and personal self-promotion. Zachary Taylor, the president, dies of stomach disorder, and Millard Fillmore takes his place. Then we go back to Douglas. He breaks the compromise into individual parts to be voted on. So the Compromise of 1850 was the victory of self-interest. So the crises of the 1850s. Sectional divisions divide the Whig Party. Some go with Free Soil, and this helps produce a Democratic victory. So Franklin Pierce is the Democratic candidate. The North really opposes the Fugitive Slave Act. However, the South is very angered because of this. Pierce's support for the Young American Movement. He supports the Young American Movement to expand American democracy. However, the South does not want to add any land without slavery. The Austin Manifesto is America's attempt to buy slave Cuba. This enrages Northerners. There's interest in further settlement, settlement and communication. So they have this idea for the Transcontinental Railroad. Where should the terms be, north or south? If south, you gotta get the Gadsden Purchase from the Mexican territory. So if you put it in the north, new territory and or states necessary. So they made it into two, Kansas and Nebraska. As of now, the state status of slavery is determined by the territory. So they're saying Nebraska is likely to be free, and Kansas is likely to be slaves. So now there's divided Whig and Democratic parties, and there's the creation of the Republican Party against this. In Kansas, so much conflict. In Kansas, two governments formed. One is pro-slavery and one is pro-free. So there's very much conflict. And it's called Bleeding Kansas because of all the violence that goes on. Such as the Potawatomi Massacre. John Brown kills bunches of pro-slavery advocates. Charles Sumner, the abolitionist, enrages Preston Brooks with his speech, and Preston Brooks beats him with a cane in the Congress House, or whatever. Most white Northerners think slavery is dangerous because what it could do for the whites, not to the blacks. In the South is a static society in which aristocrats become entrenched. There are no supporters, no opportunities for poor whites. The pro-slavery argument comes about. Slavery is viewed as a positive good rather than a necessary evil. The election of 1856, Democratic James Buchanan versus Republican John Fremont. Buchanan is elected, but there is financial panic and depression. The Republicans could blame Southern Democrats for it. And then there's the Dred Scott versus Sanford Supreme Court case, in which Justice Roger Taney rules that slave owners could take slaves anywhere, and slaves were property, not citizens. Now, this is the case that a slave brought up, and he's like, you have no right to bring up a Supreme Court case. You're not even a person, you're just property. Buchanan endorses Kansas as a slave state, and there's a pro-slavery government formed. Kansas enters as a free state, but anti-slavery groups win the majority against the Lee-Compton Constitution. Then the Lincoln-Douglas debates, in which Lincoln believes that the nation's future depends on free labor. However, he showed no alternative to slavery where it existed. Douglas doesn't really seem to show a moral position on slavery. However, these debates are what helped make Lincoln more well known throughout America. John Brown hopes to instigate a slave uprising, so he raids Harper's Ferry. However, his ambitions don't succeed and he is executed. The Southern states feel unsafe in the Union. The Democrats are divided. They are unable to nominate a candidate first. However, eventually they choose John Breckinridge. Abraham Lincoln is the Republican candidate. He is elected in 1860. Now there's a Republican minority in Congress. So now there's disunion in America, and the election of Lincoln is kind of the final straw for the southern states. So this is when they begin to secede, and then we get into the Civil War, which will be next time.